Welcome, dear listener, to another journey back in time. As the modern world fades away, I invite you to settle into a comfortable position, perhaps drawing a warm blanket close as we explore the curious corners of history together. Tonight's tale is designed to both fascinate your mind and gently ease you toward peaceful slumber as we discover the peculiar legal landscape of medieval Europe. I often wonder where in the world you might be listening from. Perhaps you're winding down after a long day, or maybe you've awoken in the small hours seeking the comfort of a soothing story. I'd love to know where you call home and what time it is in your corner of the world. Do share in the comments below. It brings me such joy to see our community of history enthusiasts gathering from across the globe. If you find yourself returning to these historical journeys, consider subscribing so you never miss our weekly ventures into the past. Each story is crafted with care, designed to transport you to different times while helping you find that perfect state of relaxation. But for now, let us leave behind our modern sensibilities and slip into a world where justice wore a different face. Sometimes stern, often strange, and occasionally absurd. Close your eyes if you wish, and let the sounds of a medieval marketplace begin to fill your imagination. The morning mist hung low over the cobblestone streets of Wittenberg as the town slowly stirred to life in the early 14th century. Roosters announced the dawn with persistent crowing, and the smell of fresh bread wafted from bakeries tucked between timber-framed houses. In the central marketplace, merchants arranged their wares with practiced hands. Bolts of cloth in rich colors, iron tools gleaming in the early light, and wooden stalls laden with autumn's harvest. "Make way for the magistrate's men," called a voice as two officials in dark robes made their way through the growing crowd, their expressions stern beneath wide-brimmed hats. "Remember the regulations today, Master Fletcher," warned the taller official, tapping his wooden staff against the ground as he addressed a cheese merchant who was arranging wheels of yellow and white cheese on a clean linen cloth. "The town council has not forgotten your failure to observe proper posture last market day." The merchant nodded vigorously, his round face flushing. "Yes, Master Alderman, I shall stand as required when customers approach. 1 foot raised, just as the law demands." This curious regulation, established after a dispute between cheese sellers and the town council years earlier, required all cheese merchants to stand on 1 foot while serving customers, ostensibly to ensure they gave their full attention to weighing goods fairly. Nearby, a crowd gathered around a baker whose shoulders slumped in resignation as the second official produced an iron contraption from his satchel. "For the third time this season, your loaves fail to meet the weight prescribed by town ordinance," the official announced loudly enough for all to hear. "The penalty is clear." The device, a shame mask fashioned to resemble a grotesque face with exaggerated features, was secured around the baker's head, its weight causing him to stoop slightly. A small placard attached to the front declared his crime: "Dishonest baker." He would wear this through the market day, a walking reminder of the consequences of cheating the townsfolk with underweight bread. Such public humiliation served as both punishment and deterrent in a society where reputation meant survival. As the morning progressed, a stranger entered the marketplace, a traveling merchant named Thomas, whose cart was laden with spices and trinkets from distant lands. His full, well-groomed beard caught the attention of the gate guards, who promptly approached him with outstretched hands. "The beard tax, good sir," demanded the shorter of the two, a man with a pock-marked face. 2 silver pennies for entry with such impressive facial hair. Thomas sighed, but reached for his coin purse. He had encountered this peculiar tax in several towns across the German lands, each with their own justification. Some claimed beards harbored disease, others that they marked a man as potentially untrustworthy or foreign. "In Saxony, they charged me for being clean-shaven," he muttered as he counted out the coins. "Said only honest men grow proper beards. It seems a man's face cannot please everyone. The guard pocketed the coins with a shrug. The council's wisdom is not for us to question. Be grateful. In Erfurt they charge double for a beard of your length. This was no mere local oddity, but one of countless strange regulations that varied wildly across medieval Europe. In some regions, beard taxes filled town coffers or discouraged certain fashions associated with enemy territories. In others, clean-shaven men faced suspicion as potential criminals trying to disguise themselves, or as individuals rejecting proper masculine appearance. By midday, the marketplace hummed with activity, haggling voices, the clatter of wooden wheels on stone, children darting between stalls on errands for their parents. Then a bell rang from the town hall, its clear tone cutting through the noise. "Make way! Clear the square!" called a herald in the colors of the town. "The court of animal trials shall commence at noon." The crowd shifted, forming a rough circle around a cleared space where town officials began arranging a table and chairs. Thomas watched in bewilderment as a small wooden cage was carried forward, containing what appeared to be a large rat. "What manner of proceeding is this?" he asked a woman, selling woolen goods beside him. She looked surprised at his ignorance. "Why, it's the quarterly animal court," she explained, lowering her voice. "That rat was caught destroying grain stores in the church tithe barn. A serious offense. Last spring, they tried a sow that trampled a child. She was found guilty and executed, though her piglets were declared innocent as they had not participated in the crime." Thomas stared in disbelief as a town official in formal robes took his seat at the table, and a clerk prepared parchment and quill. "Hear ye, good people of Wittenberg," announced the official. "We convene this court to try this rat, accused of theft of church property and destruction of the town's winter stores." With complete seriousness, a local man stepped forward as the appointed defender of the accused rodent, while another served as prosecutor. Witnesses were called to testify to the damage done, evidence of gnawed sacks was presented, and arguments were made regarding the rat's moral culpability. The proceedings followed the same formal structure as any human trial, with the defender eventually arguing that the rat was merely following its God-given nature and could not be held to human standards of behavior. After deliberation, the magistrate rendered his verdict. Having considered the evidence and arguments presented before this court, we find the accused guilty of the crimes charged. The sentence was banishment. The rat would be transported beyond the town walls and released, with a warning that return would result in death. While this particular case ended without execution, Thomas learned that many animal trials throughout Europe concluded more harshly. Pigs that killed children, locusts that destroyed crops, even weevils that infested food stores, all could be and were formally tried, sometimes with executions carried out with the same solemn ceremony afforded to human criminals. As the strange court adjourned and the marketplace returned to its normal rhythm, Thomas found himself contemplating the peculiar nature of justice in this world he traveled through. These laws, the beard tax, the one-footed cheese sellers, the shame masks, and animal trials, reflected communities struggling to create order in a world they barely understood, where divine will and human governance blurred together in a tapestry of tradition, superstition, and practical necessity. The following morning, Thomas awoke to the sound of commotion outside his lodgings. A crowd had gathered near the village pond, their voices a mixture of excitement and dread. Pulling his cloak around his shoulders against the autumn chill, he made his way toward the gathering, where he found villagers forming a semicircle around the water's edge. "What transpires here?" he asked an elderly man leaning on a gnarled walking stick. "Justice, stranger," the old man replied without taking his eyes from the scene. "Mistress Agnes stands accused of witchcraft after 3 cows died mysteriously, and crops withered in Farmer Edmund's eastern field. Today she faces the ordeal by water. Thomas watched as a woman in her middle years, her face lined with fear yet dignified, was led forward by two stern-faced men. The village priest stood nearby, clutching a heavy Bible to his chest, his expression solemn as he intoned prayers in Latin. "The Lord's will shall be revealed through water," announced the village magistrate, a portly man whose chain of office gleamed in the morning light. "If she floats, the water rejects her due to the unholy magic within her body. If she sinks, she is proven innocent, and shall be pulled forth before drowning claims her." "This is madness," Thomas whispered, but none around him seemed to share his sentiment. The woman's hands were bound at the wrists, then secured to her ankles in what they called the cross position. Right wrist to left ankle, left wrist to right ankle, making swimming impossible. As they prepared to lower her into the pond, Thomas noticed how the woman's eyes remained fixed on the sky above, her lips moving in silent prayer. The crowd held its collective breath as Agnes was slowly lowered into the cold water. For several agonizing moments, the surface of the pond rippled around her form, and then, to the visible disappointment of some onlookers, she began to sink. Two men with ropes stood ready, and at the magistrate's signal, they quickly pulled her from the water before she could drown. "The water accepts her," declared the priest. "The Lord has spoken. Agnes is innocent of witchcraft." The journey that followed took Thomas northward, where autumn painted the landscape in hues of amber and gold. After many days of travel, he arrived at the imposing stone walls of St. Benedict's Monastery, seeking shelter for the night as was customary for travelers. The brothers welcomed him with silent nods, one monk gesturing for Thomas to follow him through the arched doorway into the peaceful sanctuary beyond. A bell tolled 3 times as they crossed the courtyard, and Thomas observed how every monk immediately ceased speaking, their conversations cutting off mid-sentence as if sliced by an invisible blade. "You have arrived during the great silence," whispered the elderly monk who had been assigned to guide him, his voice barely audible. "From Compline until after morning prayers, no brother may speak unless in dire emergency. Our order holds silence sacred, for in quietude we hear God's whispers." As they passed through a long corridor, Thomas noticed a young monk standing barefoot in the corner, struggling to balance a large stone in each hand, while a third rested upon his shoulders. "Brother Matthias," his guide explained with evident disapproval, "caught speaking during last night's silence. His penance is to carry these stones through the snow-covered courtyard at dawn tomorrow. The weight of stone reminds us of the weight of our transgressions." Throughout the evening meal, Thomas marveled at the elaborate system of hand signals the monks had developed, fingers dancing in complex patterns to request bread, indicate gratitude, or ask simple questions. When one novice accidentally dropped a wooden cup, causing a loud clatter that echoed through the refectory, the abbot's stern gaze caused the young man to bow his head in immediate contrition. By morning, Thomas watched from his guest chamber window as the young offender trudged barefoot through the frost-covered courtyard, stones in hand, his breath forming clouds in the cold air as he completed his circuit 7 times as required. The following week found Thomas in the prosperous town of Nuremberg, where chance and curiosity led him to the town's court of law. Unlike the informal proceedings of the village or the silent discipline of the monastery, here justice unfolded with ceremony and spectacle. Thomas introduced himself to a thin, scholarly man hunched over parchment in the corner of the courtroom. "I am Albrecht," the man replied, dipping his quill in ink. "Court scribe for 15 years now. Today promises to be most interesting. A trial by combat to settle a dispute over valuable riverside property." "Do men truly still settle legal matters through combat?" Thomas asked incredulously. Albrecht nodded without looking up from his careful preparation of quills and parchments. "When evidence fails and testimonies conflict, combat reveals divine favor." God strengthens the arm of the righteous and weakens the unjust. I have documented 37 such trials. The scribe's fingers were permanently stained with ink, his back curved from years of hunching over documents. The combatants arrive soon. A merchant named Heinrich claims the land was included in his purchase, while the miller Conrad insists the riverbank has belonged to his family for generations. The court filled with spectators as the disputants entered. Both men had hired professional champions to fight in their stead, as was their legal right. Albrecht's quill scratched across parchment, recording every detail. The champion of Heinrich wears mail of northern make, carries a shield bearing the mark of Saint Michael. The miller's champion is younger, less armored, but more agile in movement. Thomas watched in fascination as the judge solemnly explained that God would guide the outcome, that divine will would be revealed through strength of arms. The combatants swore oaths upon holy relics, each professing the righteousness of their patron's claim. I have documented cases where men reconciled at the last moment, Albrecht whispered to Thomas, as the champions took their positions. Once a man confessed to perjury rather than allow combat to proceed, fearing divine punishment more than earthly consequences. But no reconciliation came today. At the judge's signal, the champions engaged in brutal combat, swords clashing while spectators cheered and prayed. Thomas winced at the violence, but Albrecht watched with professional detachment, his quill never ceasing its movement across the parchment. The younger champion strikes true, he narrated as he wrote. Blood flows from the elder's shoulder, a sign perhaps that the miller's claim finds favor with the Almighty. After nearly an hour of exhausting combat, the merchant's champion fell to one knee, his strength failing. The judge raised his staff, declaring the combat, and thus the case decided. So it is recorded, Albrecht murmured, completing his account with practiced flourishes. The land returns to the miller's family by judgment of combat and divine will. Thomas looked around at the satisfied faces of the spectators, marveling at their acceptance of this bloody method of determining truth. How many innocent men have lost their causes through simple misfortune in battle? He asked the scribe. Albrecht finally looked up from his parchment, his eyes reflecting years of witnessed judgments. Perhaps none, he replied thoughtfully, or perhaps many, but it is not for me to question what God reveals through trial by combat. I merely record what these mortal eyes observe. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Catherine's Cathedral, casting jeweled patterns across the worn stone floor where Thomas now stood. He had followed Albrecht from the combat grounds, curious about what the scribe had mentioned regarding other forms of justice in the city. The cathedral's vast interior hummed with an unusual energy, not merely that of prayer and contemplation, but of life being lived within its sacred walls. In the side chapels and along the ambulatory, Thomas noticed makeshift bedding, small cooking fires, and people of various stations going about daily tasks, as if the church were their home. What you see before you, Albrecht explained, gesturing to a ragged man mending a shoe near the baptismal font, is sanctuary in practice. This cobbler struck a tax collector in anger 3 weeks ago. Rather than face immediate judgment, he fled here and claimed the church's protection. Thomas watched as a priest brought the cobbler a small loaf of bread. How long can he remain? 40 days and 40 nights is the traditional period, Albrecht replied, leading Thomas deeper into the cathedral. During this time, his family negotiates with the magistrate and the injured party. Most often, a settlement is reached, perhaps a fine, public apology, or service to the community. Only the most grievous offenders face harsh punishment after sanctuary ends. In the Lady Chapel, a young woman sat nursing an infant while an older woman spun wool beside her. The daughter stole bread for her child, Albrecht whispered. The mother came to support her. The baker she stole from has already agreed to accept 7 days' labor in his kitchen once her sanctuary concludes. Thomas marveled at this system of delayed justice. Throughout the cathedral, at least 20 souls had found temporary refuge, each with their own story, each with negotiations underway. It seems a merciful practice, he observed. The Church reminds secular authorities that justice and mercy must walk hand in hand, Albrecht said. Come, there is more I would show you. They left the cathedral and crossed the town square to the magistrate's hall, where a session of the town court was underway. A boy of perhaps 12 years stood before the magistrate, head bowed as his father's hand rested firmly on his shoulder. The youth had been caught stealing apples from an orchard. This is your first appearance before this court, Jakob Schmidt, the magistrate declared, his voice stern but not unkind. The law permits me to order 10 lashes for theft, yet I see no benefit in marking a child's back for the sake of fruit. The boy trembled visibly as the magistrate continued. Instead, you shall work 4 Saturdays in Master Weber's orchard, learning the labor required to grow what you so casually took. The father bowed deeply. Thank you for your mercy, Your Honor. The boy will learn his lesson well. As they exited the hall, Thomas expressed surprise at the leniency shown. In some kingdoms, even children might lose a hand for theft. Such harshness exists, Albrecht acknowledged, but is rarer than travelers' tales suggest. Our magistrates understand that a first offense, particularly from the young, often requires correction rather than permanent punishment. A child with a severed hand becomes a lifetime burden on family and community. A child who learns from measured discipline may grow into a productive citizen. They continued through the town, passing the pillory where a red-faced man stood locked in the wooden restraint, enduring the jeers and occasional rotten vegetables thrown by passers-by. Caught using false weights in his shop, Albrecht explained. 10 years past, he might have lost an ear. Now he faces public shame and a substantial fine. The punishment has changed, Thomas asked. Indeed. Follow me to the archives, and I will show you the transformation of our laws over generations. In the town hall's record room, Albrecht carefully unfolded yellowed parchments that documented the evolution of local justice. See here, he pointed to entries from the previous century. Punishment for assault was once uniformly corporal, the breaking of limbs to match injuries caused. Yet by my grandfather's time, a system of weregild, man payment, had become common. Thomas studied the documents with fascination. So a man who breaks another's arm might keep his own intact if he can pay compensation? Precisely. The injured party receives restitution, the community avoids supporting a newly crippled member, and justice is still served. Albrecht turned to newer records. And here, notice how fines have increasingly replaced physical punishments for all but the most serious crimes. Our magistrates have discovered that a man's purse can be a more effective target than his body. As evening approached, they walked along the city walls, watching as laborers returned from the fields. Do not mistake evolution for weakness, Albrecht cautioned. Murder, arson, and treason still bring severe punishment, but our forefathers learned through generations that justice serves the community best when it balances retribution with restoration. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. In my travels, I've seen communities torn apart by vengeance disguised as justice. Perhaps there is wisdom in your city's approach. The law remains stern, Albrecht said, gazing at the sunset painting, the cathedral spires in golden light. But we have slowly learned that mercy strengthens rather than weakens the bonds between us. A man who loses his hand cannot work. A man who pays his fine becomes determined to earn back his losses. A child beaten for a mistake learns only fear. A child given the chance to make amends may understand the true meaning of justice.